the brown off there. All right. Welcome to our daily COVID-19 update. Today, we have a special guest with us today, Will Lopez with Gusto, and he's going to help us accounting fools with this daily update today. I'm Michael Lee with Reconciled, based in Burlington, Vermont, but I am actually sheltered in Tempe, Arizona today. And we're going to go around the room and just do a quick introduction. Dan, go ahead.
Dan Luthi with Ignite Spot Outsourced Accounting. We're based out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and have clients all over the United States.
I'm Chris Macksey, and I am with Prefix Accounting out of the Berkshires in Massachusetts.
I'm Jacob Schroeder, run Ascend Consulting out of Buff Fountain, Ohio.
And Amy Walker is a mute.
And Amy Walker can't hear you, but Amy, that's Amy Walker, Houston, Texas. She adds the beauty to this whole panel, which is awesome. So today, Will Lopez with Gusto, who's joining us from Denver, Colorado, is going to answer questions that we all have and our clients have related to sick leave, FMLA, unemployment, and how that's going to impact your business, especially starting tomorrow when it all kicks in because of the bill that was passed in phase 2 a few weeks ago, and the CARES Act on Friday. So Dan is going to help us lead this conversation. So Dan, go ahead and kick it off for us.
Definitely. Thank you, Michael. First off, just to that point, thank you, Will, for really taking the time to meet with us today. Being connected with one of the largest small business payroll products in the United States is quite a treat for us to be able to have connected with you. So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about you, who you are first, and we'll kind of dive into a handful of questions from there.
Yeah, Michael said this was just going to be a meeting about talking about apps or something like that. So I had no clue it was going to be on the FMLA. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so I'm Will Lopez. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Gusto's head of accountant community. I joined Gusto about 9 months ago to help lead their partner channel, their partner program, and help Gusto get itself out there more and more as far as product is concerned, the accountant journey on Gusto. And prior to that, I own an accounting firm down in South Florida called advisorfi.com, which I owned for about 6 or 7 years. Been in public accounting all my life, or at least all my adult career, and absolutely love it. Still love it to this day. And I really don't look at myself as like a part of tech. I'm just an accountant working in tech.
That's awesome. No, that's phenomenal. I kind of an interesting time to transition from being in the accounting space into this kind of fintech world from that standpoint. But I think the part that makes it so exciting and for us is that we have someone from our space and our mindset connected with one of the largest providers for small business in the United States, which gives them hopefully an upper hand on making sure they're presenting this and the resources and tools correctly across the board from that standpoint. So as we dive into this, there's multiple parts of on these paid plans or on these relief packages that provide relief for employment and things from that nature. There's things that break down from 10 weeks of PTO that people are asking about and 8 weeks of PTO and how do I solve for it? How do I get it? Things from that standpoint. How much time do I have to potentially pull off of my own personal company applied PTO and things from that nature? So definitely a whole lot of questions that we're getting from our clients regarding how we definitely apply for this, how we receive the benefits that associate with this. Will my payroll provider actually help me to make sure that I'm associating this correctly? Because we're supposed to keep benefits open. What are all the options and things we have to consider as we move through this? And so I think I will actually ask for Chris Macksey on this one. I know he's been diving super deep in it from the accounting side. Let's give just a basic understanding of the first level of this, which is this 80 hours right out the chute and what the whole framework around that is.
Yeah, so originally supposed to go, and this was supposed to go into effect on the 2nd, and it's actually going to be going into effect tomorrow. But there is going to be 80 hours of paid leave that is provided to people for emergency sick leave. And there's a couple of stipulations that are related to that. And I believe there's 3 predominant ones, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but the state is mandating a quarantine or isolation. the employer has been, or the employee has been, or the employee has been advised by their doctor that they need to self-quarantine, or the employee is has chosen to self-quarantine and is waiting on medical diagnosis. So that is the one that is kind of the most prevalent question right now in terms of the sick leave.
Definitely. So I think a lot of questions are surrounded around that. What does each individual state say? You know, how are things regulated from that standpoint? Because if you're not feeling it now, how do you make sure that you're being covered correctly? For a lot of us, we work in, you know, I guess you could say white collar positions where we can work remotely. Most of us are working from our home at this point in time. But how is this applicable for those people who don't? Those people who are working in warehouses, those people who are working in fast food or restaurants or things from that standpoint, or customer facing experiences where they don't have that opportunity to be able to work outside of that space, and maybe they don't know where they're, you know, if their state has decided to self-quarantine or quarantine from that standpoint. So the question comes to this, and I think this is probably a good question to bring up to Will from this standpoint, is where can we go to be able to find out these kind of details by state? Is there a sort of resource that's together or that you're seeing or that you guys have made available to provide to our clients so that as they're looking at this, to help them kind of just be aware of what's going on?
Yeah, so man, we're living in crazy times and there's a lot of resources everywhere, right? The problem I think we're all seeing just as a professionals and SMBs is it's just not all consolidated. We do have a resource that does speak to the FMLA. Let me see if I could find it here. We just rolled it out. It's called Everything Small Businesses Need to Know About the Families First Corona Response Act, which has a big component of all that. Let me, I don't know, Michael, I don't know if you want to post that there, but there it is. And so here's what I'd have to say. I mean, so not only is there the Families First Corona Response Act, but even the legislation, the CARES Act that Trump signed on Friday, has some FMLA impact to it as well, which I could try to break down as well. But
please do.
Yeah. Top side, like really high level, it's for companies with 500 employees or less, right? Must provide up to that 80 hours of emergency paid sick leave, right? And so it's either ill or self-isolating employees that are entitled to 100% of their regular wages up to, like, I think it's like $511 per day.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that side of it. So EEs who are caring for families, including school and I think child care closures, are also entitled to that, up to I think 2/3 of their regular wages, up to I think a cap of $200 per day. And so that's the emergency paid sick leave portion of it. And then there's the emergency family and medical leave version of it, which is the points that I have broken down is can be taken to care for a family member impacted by COVID-19, including school or child care closures. EEs are entitled to 2/3 of their wages, up to $200 per day, up to $10,000 total during the COVID pandemic, and then available after a 10-day waiting period, which is interesting in my opinion, during which EEs can use other leave types, emergency, including emergency paid sick leave. So what's interesting there is the first 10 days aren't covered. It's post 11 days forward. And the way I think the legislation read was that if they wanted to cover the first 10 days, hopefully the small business has a HR policy or an employee policy where like you have sick time, you have vacation time, you have these like paid times off moments, and they can leverage on that. So where I feel like a little bit of the fallout is on the SMB side is if you haven't thought through providing PTO, if you're too small of a business and you really didn't think about providing time off for your employees, I think you're going to see a slew of employees going to the employer saying, hey, I want those first 10 days covered, because this legislation is not covering me for the first 10 days, only post 11 days forward. So that'll be interesting to see and see how it falls out. And the way it's going to fall out state by state is, we're still trying to analyze all of that because there's Department of Labor needs to get all over it. They need to provide guidance. It's all coming together. It's like building an airplane while you're flying it, right? Like it's crazy.
And I think that's one of the pieces that's the most important about this as well, is that this is federal legislation. So this is coming down from the federal government, giving us guidelines on what should be done and how they're going to treat it. They give framework around how they're going to support the states when it comes to unemployments with loans and rates and things from that standpoint. And it gives a little bit of guidance on the state level, but each individual state also has their own guidances and own variances, determining how long you can be on unemployment, when you're eligible to start receiving unemployment, what percentage that you're eligible to receive of your previous pay and compensation. And I think as we look at the second wave of the plan and stimulus plan, there's some financial aid that the federal government is also providing to each of those individual people, just because of the variableness that goes along with those pieces. And so anybody want to dive into kind of explaining that $600 and what the whole purpose of that is and how people are eligible for that?
Hey, before we get into that topic, which is going to be huge, let's go back to an employee. You were talking about time off with pay. You allow your employees 2 weeks. You can't make them take it, but I could see a situation where they'd say, I'm going to take my 2 weeks of pay, which should be at the full amount, right? Then I'm going to come in if I need to and take the emergency leave. That's another 80 hours. And then I've got up to 12 weeks of FMLA if I need it. Does that timeline seem right, that all of that is available to an employee and an employer needs to be ready for that?
As long as they can hit the qualifications or the reasons for leave, then yes, they could.
And Amy, to your point there, I think it's really important to point out to our small business owners that this is available to your employees, whether you like it or not. Your employee who has been there for you all along through this disaster could walk in tomorrow and say, I'm going to take FMLA. They have every right to do that. And I think it's really important to talk about that standpoint of this. Because it's really easy to brush over. And I think there's a lot of small business owners out there tomorrow that they're tomorrow going to be sitting there in shock saying, what just happened to me, when half my staff just decided they need FMLA?
Yeah.
And how do I move forward from here? How do I cash flow this? What am I going to do now? Because I have to pay these wages, and what am I doing? How do we get through this? So I think it's really important just to understand this is available to your employees, whether we like it or not. Yes, there's some exemptions there that we could potentially qualify for different businesses, but realize that this option is there for your employees, very much so. Amy, I do think your timeline is correct. If they met that, it's open there. Now, I think there's some questions on that criteria as well, like has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19. Okay. Does that have to be your primary care physician? If the state's top health official says everyone should self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19, does that qualify the whole state or does it not? Like, I think there's some open questions there that I'd love some input on as well, because to Chris's point, technically, yes, if they meet the qualifications, and the wider we make that qualification, the more likely that is, Amy.
Yeah. So just to say one more time before we get into this other meaty topic that's coming up, if you didn't hear Jacob before and you're a small business owner, heads up, if you haven't thought this through, this happens tomorrow. So be thinking this through and what you're going to be able to bankroll.
Well, and I think there's some important, let's hold off on diving into the $600 of extra money that we're getting that we talked about on Friday, that was signed up with us last Friday. Let's talk about the initial 2 weeks or 10 days. Let's talk about the 80 hours. Let's dive into the 12 weeks from that standpoint. First things first, who's going to pay for this, right? I mean, because most of these clients that I'm hearing from are coming to me saying, that's great that the federal government's promising all of these things. How do I maintain a cash flow of that? And two, who's going to track this information? Because most systems and softwares aren't set up to create some sort of external software solution. And I actually love to get Will's opinion on this, because I know that, Gusto being a payroll product, definitely people are looking to you guys saying, I have no clue what I'm doing. How do you help me to make sure I work through this?
Yeah, I think the difficulty here is all this legislation is so multifaceted and so contingent on federal, state, municipal, banks, institutions, payroll companies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that trying to get everything streamlining in real time in such a way where someone's going to experience minimal bumps along the way is just not going to happen. Because it's just moving too quickly, it's being thrown together. And just even to expand it, so like speaking of the CARES Act, I have the labor provisions inside the CARES Act up, and they even amended the FMLA expansion and emergency paid sick leaves from that Families First CARES Act, that employers are not required to pay more than the daily and aggregate limits, so on and so forth. And then it goes on to define that it also defines employees to include employees laid off by their employers not earlier than March 1st, 2020. So now that's another dimension to it, who worked for not less than 30 of the last 60 calendar days prior to being laid off and was rehired by the employer. So, at Gusto, what we're trying to do is evaluate everything that's happening legislatively and the core payroll impact and what the small business owner and accountant experience should be around that. So we're trying to bucket things, I think, in two categories. One, what can we do as far as education is concerned? So are there things that really aren't kind of payroll specific that impact payroll, but we still take the role of educating both the business owner and the accounting professional, right? And we're bucketing those items in that bucket. The other bucket is, what are of these legislations like the FMLA expansion and all this other stuff, what does impact core payroll, and what are we going to do to quickly resolve it? So I think as of yesterday, we got everything that has anything to do with FMLA live inside the apps, and will guide small business owners through all of that, through the limits and all the workflows associated to it. So we worked really, really quickly to make sure that by tomorrow, we could be in a great position to guide, right? And then tangentially to that is we're trying to create resources to help upskill people, because that's the other struggle is, forget trying to stay compliant, right? It's about like, what do I need to understand what's happening here, and I don't even understand it. And so it's trying to do both at the same time. And I mean, for anybody who's experiencing this firsthand, which is wild, it's hard to all put together.
Yeah.
So I want to ask a couple questions there, Will, but I wanted to clarify something first. Obviously, that amendment means that if you've laid somebody off, they can come back to you and say, I want on sick leave or FMLA. Now, we can question why they would do that, right? Like, there's a bigger discussion, but that can be done. So just be aware of that.
Theoretically, yeah.
From a cash flow perspective, when I look at this, and I want some feedback from everybody on this, I believe there's a couple different ways you can get this. So in the one bill, they have advance credits, which I don't think there is a method to receive those yet, in which the government would pay you before you have to cash flow this out.
I saw a draft of the application for that, but it's only a draft.
Okay, that's what I thought. I didn't think we had a method to do that yet. So
Yeah.
Fair warning, you've seen that credit out there, that there should be a method for the government to pay you before you have to pay your employees FMLA and sick. That's off the table. So what there is a payroll tax credit on the backside to receive this. My question to you guys, Will, is have you guys built a process where you are going to be impounding a lesser amount if there is sick pay because of that? Or are we waiting until the actual monthly or quarterly 941 is being filed to take any of that credit? Because from a cash flow perspective, I think that's a big difference to the employer. If they can reduce the amount being impounded from the bank account to offset that credit, that's a huge move for them. But I also understand there's probably a whole lot of legal compliance on your guys' end that raises if we're doing that versus just taking that credit on the 941.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to be in a position right now where I know exactly what we're going to do, but but I think we're working through it quickly to figure out what we should do, what would be the right thing to do. What's great about, personally, I mean, this is just my personal opinion about Gusto's internal leadership and the way we go about doing business, is we always do what's right, and we always do what's right on behalf of both the small business owner and the accounting professional that they work with. there's still a lot of guidance we need. I think just from the DOL, from everybody else. I think there is still some ways to go as far as what are the avenues that can be taken and what's right and what will put companies in a better position. But I don't have the answer to that now. So unfortunately,
Yeah.
I have another hard question for you, Will. Your development team, are you currently measuring the amount of energy drinks that they are consuming in pallets, water trucks, or oil tankers? What is the unit of measurement that you're using right now?
You know, it could be up in the pallet oil tanker range. Probably like the forklifts, bulldozer, like dropping bangs and Red Bulls.
There's a Red Bull tap right there. And
Well,
to
the
each,
problem is
yeah,
they're all working from home, right?
right.
So how do we make sure we keep these guys as fuel? That's actually the question. We can't ship them to your office.
That's the worst part about working from home, quite honestly. At least it is for me. I don't know about any of you, is I could just go right upstairs and start cranking out an 18-hour workday.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I could justify that kind of stuff to myself. But you know, what's good is, you know, leadership understands that we're trying to moderate ourselves and stuff like that, which is great. But we understand like this is the time to step up really too. So it's hard to balance like the time to step up and then kind of making sure that you're taking care of yourself and your family too. In my situation, I'm a way better off than I deserve, quite honestly, because my wife is a stay-at-home mom and she homeschooled my kids. So some of the impact from COVID hasn't really landed in my family other than me working from home. So that's why I say I'm like way better off than I deserve. So I'm happy to work long days to help you, to help everybody else, and help take the edge off other team members to like get that stuff done.
So let's say you're a business owner. You're like, okay, I get this is happening tomorrow. I've got, you know, a half a dozen employees, a dozen employees. I'm willing. I've got access to capital, or I'm getting a loan. I'm going to fund this sick leave, this FMLA. I'll get tax, you know, I'll get the credits back through payroll tax. But now I got to go work with my payroll vendor to make this happen. Right. So like, let's say I'm all down, I'm ready. And I've got the local regional payroll vendor that I'm using. I'm not using a partner like Gusto, who's got programmers who are moving very fast to make this work. I've got, you know, this payroll vendor that has 500 local businesses as their clients. What do you recommend I do? Because I don't got time to track this sick leave differential, you know, you name it, whatever, but I'm willing to pay. I got the money. I'm willing to pay it, make sure my employees can be taken care of. What are your recommendations on my partner that's the payroll provider who has to handle this for me, or I'm hoping will handle this for me?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, that's a question for you, Will. Yeah, that's a question for you.
I mean, I would love to know what any of you would say to like a pro like me if I were not at Gusto and I'm like, yo, I'm using this small shop payroll company. What do I do? I mean, I think the answer is obvious. Like, and this is not salesy at all. Like, right. This was what I was doing in my practice. It's about putting yourself and your clients in a really good position using the right resources, right? And this has nothing to do with, you know, signing up for programs or anything like that. It has everything to do with future-proofing yourself, making sure that, you know, one of the things I used to get myself into when I was at Advisorify was like doing good diligence on the solutions that we were using. Like, how fast are your teams moving?
Yep.
If something like this were to happen, what's your response time? I mean, I quite honestly, I'm fairly shocked at how fast we personally moved at Gusto to create the content that we did and create in-app experience. From my understanding, I've not seen one ecosystem partner that serves the accountant channel create any kind of in-app experience that is trying their best to position accountants in a good spot to help them with their clients, right? And if 2008 wasn't an indicator enough that like the connection between an SMB and a pro needs to be super tight at the moment, and with like 3.3 million unemployment claims, potential like 10 to 15% unemployment rates, maybe, I don't even know, like it's now. So, you know, I just feel for all the late adopters, quite honestly. I mean, I even like threw it on my LinkedIn channel. I'm like, look, the industry has been holding like tech adoption and like innovation really at like an arm's distance for as long as I've been in the industry. And now look at where we are. Like this is, if you would have just adopted it, your clients wouldn't be experiencing what they're experiencing, and the learning curves that you have to go through yourself personally, you wouldn't be experiencing what you're experiencing. So I talk about a webinar I did about 2 weeks ago with Drav, where we ran Blake Oliver ran a poll, and it basically said, you know, what are you doing to communicate with your clients? And like 35% of the people that were in that webinar basically said, A, we haven't done anything, any comms around COVID. And then B, we don't plan to do any comms around COVID. And I think that literally the takeaway there is it's way too much. We cannot handle the like information overload. So, I mean, happy to have you here at Gusto is what I'm saying, but that has nothing to do with what the mentality and the behavior that accounts should be doing right now.
Yeah, and I saw an email. One of my clients forwarded me emails from his attorney that said, and I've seen other clients forward emails from their CPA saying, we are available to help you with these loans and all of this stuff after July 15th. And I'm sitting there going, after July 15th, they won't be in business after July 15th if you can't provide help today, right. Literally. So, you know, that is nuts. So I like your wording, Will.
I think there's a few things that we have to point out with some of the stuff that Will said, right? I mean, number one is being, even as a large organization like they are, they're working as fast as they can to get this as updated as quickly as possible. There's no perfect answer right now, right? I mean, this isn't like a standard 941 that people are filing that has a very rote process that's been consistent for a very long period of time. Some of this stuff is 3 days old now that we're now dealing with from that standpoint. And so it's really important that one, we recognize how much this impacts small business by the outflow of cash that small business owners are making, the hard decisions they're having to make regarding the, you know, do I put my employees on unemployment? Do I not? Do I wait? Can I give another 3 or 4 weeks? But also at the same point in time too, making sure that they understand you also have to make sure you have the right solution to track this information correctly. And it's going to take a little bit to get that where it needs to be. Hopefully, the whole industry from a payroll processing standpoint will be able to get it done quickly. Definitely think there's going to be some faster adopters and making sure the system's set up more efficiently and more effectively for certain clients. And, you know, for us, we're huge fans of Gusto at Ignite Spot. We've always have been. Loving the new features you guys are releasing, and definitely, you know, from that standpoint also, I know you guys have your stuff also going out for being able to track sick leave and things from that standpoint internally with the product, which is huge. That's going to save a lot of people time and minimization from there. But also on the second note with that, from that standpoint too, is when it comes to partner choices, I think it's very important for everybody to understand that always the new freshest thing is not always the best thing. You have to ask those appropriate questions. You know, how are you going to help us stave through certain situations, and not necessarily understand what types of back resources they have, but what type of focus they have regarding those certain situations. And we talked about this yesterday when it came to S&B loans. You know, don't look for the guy down the street who's done one SBA loan in the last, 3 years. Make sure you go with someone who knows what they're doing, is very proactive in making sure that the resources are available, who's doing the absolute best that they possibly can to be able to stay on top of it. I know, Amy, you had a question also, so let's turn it over to you for just a minute.
No, I think those are great points. And then I also just want to remind everybody pretty much of the obvious. Gusto, of course, they're Get Up, Ready to Go. In fact, Will, last week, you may not have seen it, but in our first episode, we kind of threw the gauntlet down in a subtle way and said, we hope our payroll providers their engineers are rocking and going to help us out. And we've had great support from Gusto. But also, as a small business owner or as an accountant providing services to those small business owners, you have to work. You can't just rely on that service provider. I told my team this morning, accountants, this is your moment. This is your moment, and all your training comes into place. You need to have somebody either in your company or you providing that service to be the point person to be able to put a system in place that you can replicate to track all this, just so it's organized. When it comes down to people's pay, there is no room for error. They will know every penny that they are due, and you better know it too and be able to back that number up. So thanks, Gusto. I just want to say again, y'all know when I get to pick, I pick Gusto, and we really appreciate everything you're doing for us to get ready for this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I appreciate you including me on the conversation. I really don't want it to be like a Gusto thing, but the way I try to communicate internally is, we are in the people business, right? So we call ourselves a people platform. We're in the people business. And if there weren't a moment for Gusto itself as just a company to kind of step up and prove to its clients, let's say not the accounting profession at large, let's just say its users, its accounting partners, it's now. So, I care about the profession very much. I love the accounting profession. I will bleed on that flag to keep the stripes red. So, for me, it's personal. So, I haven't rested. I won't rest, and I will not rest, until I feel like accounts have what they need to best position themselves. So I totally agree with you, Amy. I don't think Gusto should, from a practitioner standpoint, Gusto should be your end all be all as far as your resources. It needs to be a holistic solution of things that you need to be using, communities that you're a part of, other solutions that are also doing the same thing. But now's the time to reevaluate those deep partnerships. And I try to hone a message to the teams here at Gusto where it's like, I personally have an agenda where I want us to redefine what it means to partner with a resource like Gusto. Yeah. So this is not a Gusto thing. This is kind of like cloud accounting 2.0. When you partner with a resource, it's not a one-way street where you give somebody money and they give you software in exchange, right? And so it's a two-way street where we empower you with the right resources, you use us to the best of your ability and weave us in to your best of your ability, and we will do the likewise. We'll receive your feedback, we'll prioritize things, and that's what a real partnership looks like. And I personally have always been in an industry where that partnership doesn't work like that. And it's like, there's the solution, they want to charge you premium for support. And it's like, if you need us, you pay for us first. But personally, I don't live in that land. And I don't want us to live in that land. So I appreciate the kind words.
Definitely.
I mean, Michael, I think to answer your question that you originally asked, Will, is what do you say to that person who has a small payroll provider? I'm going to say now's the time to figure out whether they're really there for you or not. Like right. You're going to find that out. Yeah. And I hate that you're finding it out right now when it's critical. But how they respond to this is going to be, are they really there for you? Or do they just want your money, right? The ones that really care for you, if they have to do this all manually and it takes them 4 times as much work, they're going to step up to the plate and do it manually and make sure you get it done. It may not be super smooth, but they're going to make sure it's done right for you. And that's what I say to those the small guys that are on here. If you want to keep your customers, step up to the plate and prove to them that they really matter, right? And that's where you find those partnerships. And I think to echo everybody else's thoughts, that we all feel like Gusto has stepped up to the plate for us, and they've done that for us, and that's why we value this partnership so much, even more so than we did before. But even if you're not using Gusto, those same principles, are they going to step up to the plate for you, or are they going to be like, we'll help you after July 15th when it's too late? Right. And that's how we should be evaluating all of our partnerships. All your advisors, everything about this situation is going to teach you, are those people there for you and want you to succeed, or are they just there to collect the money from you? And I think that's what, it's not just your payroll provider, it's your accountant, it's all your advisors right now. Are they there for you and rallying behind you, or are they leaving you hang out to dry?
This sounds like a great blog opportunity for any of you that would like to write a blog for other accountants to read on how to pick a right partner.
For sure.
So raise your hand in your slide.
After July
15th.
I don't want to get too far distracted here, though.
Yeah, I do want to tie back to that for just one quick second. I know there's 2 parts of this I want to make sure we touch on. This goes about an hour. We're at the kind of 35-40 minute mark. just to clarify, of course, we have the 80 hours that's up front. That's all available to everybody. It's at the employee's current pay rate up to a maximum, right? Or maximum minimum, whatever it is from that standpoint. There's a cap that's related to it from that perspective. We talked about what those specific reasons are, what they're available to. Stately, state, federal, whatever it is from that standpoint, quarantine requirements need to be set in stone for part one. Part two is healthcare provider asked to self-quarantine. They're still eligible for that full wage from that standpoint. Or if they're showing symptoms and they just determine that they need to self-quarantine from that standpoint. Along with that, there's also the availability for family. So if you're taking time off for those 2 weeks to spend time with your family, it's not at the same standard rate. So let's make sure we're clear on that from that standpoint. The way that it's been communicated down is that it's 2/3 of the employee's regular rate up to that $200 per day threshold through that process for those first 10 days. And of course, definitely the same type of things, come into place with school and things from that nature.
With a $10,000 max on that.
Correct. Yep, exactly. There is maxes that are related to these from that standpoint as well. So let's dive into the 12-week function that it goes with that just a little bit further to discuss that. So this is 12 weeks. First 2 weeks are unpaid. Remaining 12 weeks are 10 weeks are under the paid leave with the reinstatement rights that we talked about. They have to be employees of the organization to be able to receive this. And it's 2/3. It's 2/3 across the board is the max that's amount with the 200 per day, 10-week cap at $10,000. Is there anything else outside of that where we can communicate to our customers or to small business owners that they need to help understand what that means for them, how they track it? I know we talked about that a little bit, that Gusto has some of those features that are built within it. Again, hoping that all payroll providers will have some sort of resource available for that as well to keep it simple and organized. But let's talk about that a little bit, and then talk about the additional $600 that came out in the most recent relief package.
You want me to go first?
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, so regardless of Gusto, it's from my perspective, it's about whether or not the product can satisfy the journey of what this FMLA will look like, right? The employee journey, making sure that the caps are there, that the SMB gets notified, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, on all of that kind of stuff. The 12 weeks after the leave starts, whichever is earlier, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the exception here is, let me read it here. It says, employers with 50 employees may be exempt from these requirements if the U.S. Secretary of Labor determines that they will jeopardize the business's viability as an ongoing concern. Employers with fewer than 25 employees can be exempt from restoring an employee to their position, et cetera, et cetera. And then so long as they meet if they meet the following criteria, and one of them is if they fail to meet the position no longer exists due to the pandemic, or the employer makes reasonable effort to restore the employee to a similar position. If those two fail, then the employer makes a reasonable effort in the year following the end of the leave, or 12 weeks after the leave starts, whichever is earlier, to let the employee know that their equivalent position exists again. So that's my understanding of at least one dimension of the 12 weeks. And I'd love to hear just your input, because I've not caught up terribly on the 12-week component, unfortunately, as my team is blitzing through it.
Now I'm going to point to Chris on this one. Chris earlier today did a webinar with his company to talking about this specifically, and they dove deep into the 12 weeks. So I know we'll start with him, and then I know Chris or Jacob has some items after that we can dive through.
What are you asking?
What's the 12 weeks all about, man?
Yeah, talk to us about the 12 weeks. Talk to us about the limitations. I know Will just brought up the functionality within the 25 or less employees or 50 less employees clauses based off of the requirement of maintaining and keeping those jobs or those positions being available depending on financial viability. Give us your take on what you've read and understand from there.
I'll be honest. I'm gonna pass on this question because I'm not. I don't know if I feel comfortable answering this question quite yet.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
I mean,
I mean,
I think
Go
that's
ahead.
the reality, though. Like, this portion of the bill gets a little fuzzy, right? And we're not here to say that, there's a lot of guidance that needs to come out on these portions still, right? The 12, and that's just reality. So what we read and what we think the bill says, I'm a tax person. I see this all the time. You read the bill, and any normal person would assume it means one thing, and the government comes out with a guidance that it's in a very different direction. And I think that's an important thing to note, in this, that all of this is our interpretation of it without a lot of guidance. So I think the goal behind the 12 weeks, just to talk about this again, is always 2 weeks unpaid up front. The thought process was you could take sick leave for those or take some other things. 10 weeks worth of time. Hopefully by the time we get through 10 weeks in this pandemic, the thought process is we're back to normal and we can restore that back. I think was the thought process behind a lot of that. The restoration of benefits restoration of job raises some big questions for me as we were going through there, especially with the fact that somebody can come back and request FMLA in a case where we've laid them off already. So just throwing this out there, and would love to see some feedback. If you have a restaurant today that had 10 servers, and suddenly a server's wondering if when this is all over with, you only need 7 servers. Well, if they request FMLA, then you have the obligation to restore them or show their position has been eliminated. Well, if there's still a server, does that mean they get the rights to that server position or any other position that we're looking at within groups, right? I think this raises a lot of questions from a legal side and HR side, which I don't know that, obviously none of us here are lawyers to answer this question, but there could be some interesting wrinkles to this that it creates in there.
I think you bring up very sound positions on that, Jacob, and from the standpoint of, number one, there's a lot of murky water when it comes to determining what the best course and path is with this. Right now, we know for a fact that there's a requirement that we have to provide, but there's some exceptions to the rules, right? There's some exceptions to financial viability. There's exceptions to positions. There's exceptions to the processing pieces with that. And I think what's most important about this process too with it is number one, it starts tomorrow, that we have to be prepared for this, that is not retroactive as it goes through from that standpoint with the clause that Will talked about earlier, going back to March 1st, potentially. But that being said, this is one of those areas that it being so new, it's going to take a little bit for us to get further clarification regarding what legally there are limitations or not limitations with this process as we're moving through it. So we have to make sure that we're paying attention to what the federal government's stating, paying attention to what the states are regulating through that process and understanding those pieces as it goes through. Along with that, we also need to understand what pieces are coming through for unemployment as available to each individual employee as well. It's easy to get wrapped up into, I want to keep my employees on because I'm worried about what's going to happen to them or how things are going to coincide from that standpoint too. With the changes with unemployment, in some cases, in some instances, those employees are going to be able to get relief immediately. Some states have removed completely the wait times that are going through from that standpoint. They're also extending the length of time that people have available for unemployment from 16 weeks to 32 weeks or even longer from that standpoint. And then most recently, we were informed that there was another $600 on top of what people were going to be receiving through unemployment that was going to be available to them as well as a part of that compensation plan. And so I think it's really important and to understand all of these pieces and the functionalities that go along with them, but also as we look at it, also be looking at what your business viability is through this process as well. And knowing that you have to manage your own individual cash flow. There's no guarantees or promises you're going to get all the relief that's available through from where things are coming at from that right now. There's no guarantees or promises that even with that relief, that it's going to be forgiven through some of the forgiveness programs as well. And so determining what your business can or can't do is super crucial right now. If you can maintain under your current team and you have the financial viability to stay on top of it, it may make a lot of sense to work through some of these things and be prepared for those processes. But at the same point in time too, like we mentioned earlier, you don't know if your employee's going to come in the door tomorrow and say, hey, I need to go home and be with my kids. The last 2 weeks have been hell. It's been really hard for me to work through this process as we've been trying to figure this out. School starts back up again. This state that we're in just decided that they're pushing it through the end of the school year. I cannot deal with my 3 kids working and going to high school or whatever it is, and do my job at the same point in time. And so understanding that there is an opportunity for them to take leave from that standpoint that's available to them, meaning that you as a business owner say, okay, there's leave that's available. We have to offer this to them. Federally, it's required. Noting that also at the same point in time too, on the other side, if you lay them off, there's also resources that are available to them as well. And being laying off doesn't mean necessarily cutting ties completely. We talked a little bit about furlough yesterday, along with this as well, and what that means and how furlough ties. We had some discussion earlier today regarding furlough, also regarding what that means for benefits and how that ties. Some states, being a furloughed employee still allows you to retain as an employee of the organization. And so you still receive all the benefits that are provided to it. And so you would have to pay that back, but you're paid through workers' comp. There's a lot of things that tie into that piece. And so it's really important to understand at your state level also what type of implications these have for you as well. And I'd like to kind of open it up from that standpoint to anybody else to give some thoughts regarding these topics.
I think that one of the combination of the unemployment benefit, we're in a scenario where a lot of businesses currently have already laid off employees. And so right now, the scenario that is the biggest possible problem here is, what are employees going to do here? Are they going to take the $600 plus the UI that they're currently getting through their state? Or are they going to try to come back onto payroll and get 2/3 of their salary? Now, there is a gray area in there where most employees that are on the lower end of the income spectrum are probably going to opt to stay on unemployment, because the $600 plus half or 75% or whatever their state is offering is going to be more than them going back onto payroll and only making 2/3, right?
So Chris, I want to ask you real quick on the 600, do we know that that is a flat amount per person, or is that the cap?
Jacob?
That is a flat amount per person. I have the bill in front of me. It is the amount determined under state law plus an additional 600 in this section referred to as federal pandemic unemployment compensation. So it is truly just a flat $600 in addition to whatever their state pays. And obviously every state's a little different there. States have different maxes, states have different percentages they pay, but it is the state amount of normal calculation plus a flat $600.
And that is weekly?
That is paid on a weekly basis, yes.
And
Correct.
then I'm just thinking nuts and bolts, how they get that. Friday night when it was signed into law, I heard that those funds were going to be distributed to each state and the states were going to be responsible for. Is that still the case?
Yes, so the state has 2 options on how to distribute this. They can distribute it with the normal check, or they can distribute it as a second check, but it must be on the same weekly schedule as the normal unemployment compensation. Now, one big caveat in here is the very beginning of this law, the states may opt into this fund. There is no requirement that the states have to opt into and give their unemployed people an extra $600. Now, I can't imagine that a state is going to say, we don't care about our unemployed people getting an extra $600 a week. But I also, with that, there has to be some sort of formal mechanism for them to opt in, I'm assuming. And I don't know that that's been fully created yet, or that process has been done for them to be able to opt in. So there's not a set time frame on when this kicks in. I know it does end on July 30th is when that extra $600 ends, but I don't see a determination of like when it starts besides when the bill starts and a state opts in.
Right, and so it's likely that this is going to be a lot like the Medicaid expansion, where like states are opting into the Medicaid expansion, and so there are probably going to be states that don't opt into that are going to, for whatever reason, not opt into this either. But if that's the case, then we're going to have a lot of people that are not going to be taking that paid family leave until they get into the higher end, unless they're in that higher end of the income bracket where that makes financial sense to them.
Yeah.
The other thing to consider with this is the Paycheck Protection Program and how that comes into this. Because it's my understanding that these two, the paid family leave and the emergency sick leave, don't exactly, they're not, you can't get this Paycheck Protection Program and have it pay for this leave.
Yeah, why don't we hold off and do a deeper dive on that tomorrow, just because we've gone so long so far. But Will, I want to thank you for joining us and being such a great resource, and to Gusso for being a great partner to everybody here on the call. And I probably doesn't need to be said, but Gusso's well open for business and taking on new customers. And so if you need any support, you can reach out to any of us for help. We're willing to help you get on there if your current partner is not able to help you as they should. But any final thoughts, Jacob? I think you wanted to say something before we go.
No, I'm good.
We're good.
I
Awesome.
actually have a final thought, and actually an update. I just saw a message just internally that on the federal tax credit side, that this was 2 hours ago, that we just received IRS draft forms and instructions on the federal tax credits, and which we're reviewing, and which could still change as the IRS figures out how to support the program. But yeah, a lot going on at the moment, and thanks for having me, and we're trying our best just to queue everything up for everyone.
Well, everyone stay healthy and safe this week. Dan, go ahead.
I think we'd appreciate it from that standpoint. I mean, from all of our perspectives. I just want to be clear too. This is not us getting paid by Gusto in any way, shape, or form.
No.
You
didn't get that check?
Shout this out, from that standpoint. This is, when we were talking about this initially and picking a partner, we picked was, we discussed this, a partner that we're all very familiar with and that we all push in our own individual firms. And so definitely are grateful for your guys' time with it, and also being on the front lines with us through the process. It's not easy to navigate this as a small business owner or as an accountant at this point in time. And, being small firms too, and whether you're 2 employees or whether you're 500 employees, knowing you have a large resource behind you to help support you is super crucial. And hopefully we can be that by, doing presentations like this, but also just note that we're all trying to do the best we can to get as much information as possible.
Yep. Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate all the kind words, and I personally couldn't be more honored. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Be safe.
you.
See you guys tomorrow.